Hello, and welcome to Module 1 of the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center course, Accessible Pedestrian Pathways. My name is Rachel Byerly, and I'm Communications Director at NADTC, and am serving as moderator for this course. A little bit about me before we get started. I have a background in transportation planning and have worked for the Kentuckiana Regional Planning and Development Agency in Louisville, the Kentucky Transportation Center at the University of Kentucky, the City of Janesville, Wisconsin, and the Janesville MPO. While based in Washington, D.C., I've served as Public Transportation Technical Assistance Coordinator at the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, you may know that as AASHTO, and have been Communications Director at Easter Seals for a decade, having been involved with Easter Seals Project Action, the National Center on Senior Transportation, and now the NADTC. The presentation today provides a general background on the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, application to pedestrian environments. Unfortunately, we're not going to delve into engineering or technical requirements in this course, so for some of you this may be more of a review or a reminder of the basics. But it's a good launching pad for understanding how we got to where we are with ADA application to walking and public right-of-way. In this ADA overview, we'll learn about ADA application to transportation and the U.S. Department of Transportation's role through the Federal Highway Administration, ADA in the pedestrian environment, the three primary types of accessibility taken into consideration by pedestrian infrastructure, ADA as it applies to new projects and alterations. We'll also take a look at universal design versus ADA, and we'll touch on inclusion of the disability community in pedestrian planning. Let's get started with the Americans with Disabilities Act. The ADA as a law was enacted by U.S. Congress in 1990. The ADA made it illegal to discriminate against persons with disabilities, and the law mandates that all public spaces, including transportation facilities, accommodate persons with disabilities. Application of the ADA to the pedestrian environment is conducted through standards and guidelines of the U.S. Access Board. The Access Board guidelines represent the minimum provisions to meet the ADA. Local applications may be more stringent depending on jurisdiction. The ADA is a civil rights law, and the applications are designed to create an equal travel environment. The law itself builds on and extends requirements under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And it's this foundation that determines the U.S. Department of Transportation's responsibilities in applying the ADA. And so we'll delve a little bit more into U.S. DOT's role and responsibility, and also specifically that of the Federal Highway Administration. As part of the Federal Highway Administration, or FHWA's regulatory responsibility under Title II of the ADA and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, FHWA ensures that recipients of federal aid and state and local entities that are responsible for roadways and pedestrian facilities do not discriminate on the basis of disability in any highway transportation program, activity, service, or benefit they provide to the general public. And FHWA is responsible for ensuring that people with disabilities have equitable opportunities to use public rights-of-way. The U.S. Department of Transportation implements the ADA through ADA Accessibility Guidelines, commonly known as ADAG, which applies to facilities located outside the public right-of-way, and through the Public Rights-of-Way Guidelines, also known as PROAG, which applies to facilities located within the public right-of-way except for structures. In 2006, the U.S. Department of Transportation adopted the 2004 ADAG as accessibility standards under Section 504, but in doing so, US DOT added Section 406.8, which requires detectable warnings at curb ramps. Regarding the Public Rights-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines, the U.S. Access Board is in the process of developing guidelines specifically for the public rights-of-way. After completion of the Access Board's rulemaking, the U.S. Department of Transportation and the U.S. Department of Justice will need to adopt the guidelines before the guidelines can be considered enforceable standards. Until the proposed guidelines are adopted as standards, the Federal Highway Administration considers the proposed guidelines to represent best practices for accessibility issues in the public right-of-way not covered by DOT's or DOJ's currently adopted standards. To read more about ADAG and PROAG, you can visit the U.S. Access Board website at www.access-board.gov, or you can also check FHWA's civil rights web pages. So that was a very high-level overview of FHWA's responsibility regarding streets, sidewalks, and pedestrian facilities. Let's now take a look at accessibility and how the concept of accessibility is approached. The three primary types of accessibility addressed for pedestrians are physical, sensory, and cognitive. Physical accessibility relates to architectural design and environmental characteristics that assist people to walk, stand, and sit as they travel from place to place. Sensory accessibility takes into consideration visual, auditory, and tactile senses relative to design and information sharing. Cognitive accessibility relates to ability to understand and apply directions, instructions, and signage. We'll now take a look at some specific accessibility examples. For physical accessibility, an example would include a curb ramp with detectable warnings. An example of a sensory accessibility application would be an audible pedestrian signal, and this could contain a countdown feature, so this provides both visual and audible cues. One example of a cognitive accessibility application would be a color-coded map and design scheme used in a downtown area. This design appeals to differing types of cognitive processing. ADA-specific features for pedestrians include curb cuts or ramps, continuous sidewalk availability, and detectable warnings. It should be noted that the ADA does not require a public agency to provide pedestrian facilities, but when they are provided, they must be accessible to people with disabilities. We mentioned public right-of-way earlier, and sidewalks are part of the public right-of-way. Other features include travel lanes, medians, planting strips, and other facilities. In many places across the country, you'll note that the installation of curb ramps is becoming a familiar sight when streets are constructed or altered. We'll take a look at why this is. The U.S. Department of Transportation stipulates that any project for construction or alteration that provides access to pedestrians must be made accessible to people with disabilities. Alterations can include reconstruction, rehabilitation, widening, resurfacing, and signal installations or upgrades. The exception is that regular maintenance is not considered alteration. Maintenance includes, but is not limited to, joint repair, pavement patching, so that could be repairing a pothole, shoulder repair, signing, striping, minor signal upgrades, and drainage repairs. Let's talk about incorporating ADA accessibility to the maximum extent feasible. This means physical possibility. Cost is not a factor in determining whether meeting standards has been completed to the maximum extent feasible. Exemptions from meeting the ADA standards are very rare and may occur where physical terrain or site conditions restrict construction or alteration of the facility to standard. It should be noted that accessible signals and signs must be considered. We'll discuss signals in greater detail during Technology Week of this course. Curb ramps are one of the most commonly recognized forms of accessibility by the public. Curb ramps are needed to provide continuous connections between sidewalks and across roadways or traffic. This may include traffic islands so that the pedestrian can get to one sidewalk on one side of the street to the other side of the street. Detectable warning surfaces are integrated into curb ramp design, and they serve as tactile cues to pedestrians who are blind or who have visual impairments. Flat-top truncated domes in a grid pattern are used in the United States, and the size and spacing of the domes is specified by the U.S. Access Board. We just covered the basic ADA overview for this course. As I noted earlier, this just scratches the surface. A common question people have is, what's the difference between the ADA and universal design? While related in their focus on accessibility, universal design is a broader concept that pertains to creating environments, objects, and systems that can be used by as many people as possible. common example that is often referenced is that adults pushing strollers or people pulling luggage on roller wheels find great use out of curb ramps as they cross the street. In Module 2, you'll put your ADA awareness to practice when you conduct a walking assessment in your community. Walking assessments are one way that people with disabilities, older adults, students, and walkers of all ages can participate in the planning process. During the assessment, you can consider policies or projects that are needed to remove barriers and improve access overall. This includes the ADA Overview presentation. Please take the Module 1 quiz and read ahead to prepare for the Module 2 walking assessment. Whenever you're ready, you can conduct and submit your assessment. If you have questions at any time, post them to the Learning Management System forum or contact Rachel Byerly, and that contact information will be on the final slide of this presentation. If you'd like to read more about the Federal Highway Administration and the U.S. Department of Justice's roles and responsibilities related to pedestrian civil rights, a link to FHWA's question and answer page is on the bottom of this slide. Thank you for listening to the Module 1 ADA Overview. Please feel free to contact us at any time if you have questions about this course or other pedestrian issues.